again, everyone. Welcome to today's session. This is the third event that we have hosted in this series that is part of an ongoing series of webinars that we do for students around student success topics. This fall, we ran 3 workshops on building confidence, whether you're in the classroom, you are a writer like today's session, or taking a test, right? All of those things can make people feel a little stressed out and concerned. So this is an opportunity to just hear some best practices on how to feel more confident around those core things you need to do as a student. So I am Lauren Lobdell. I lead the client services team here. This is a part of the client services program that we offer. So I'm going to be here just moderating, and I'll come back at the end to do Q&A. But the real presenter today is Dr. Amy Dietzman, who is on our learning services team. She manages all of our student success tutoring, as well as hosts these wonderful workshops for all of you. So we hope you get a lot out of today's session. And with that, I will pass to Amy and see you at the end for the Q&A.
Great, thank you, Lauren. Hi, everybody. Today, we're going to talk about one of the nearest and dearest subjects to my heart, writing. I love writing. I love teaching writing. I love talking about writing. And today, we're going to discuss some ways that you can become a better writer. We're going to identify how you decode directions so that you can get right to what your instructor wants you to write. And we're going to explore the significance of writing rubrics and how you can use them to get better grades. And since writing and academic integrity go hand in hand, we're going to talk a little bit about how to avoid plagiarism. Before we talk about writing, well, we need to start with reading. Reading makes you a better writer. William Faulkner said, "Read everything, trash, classics, good and bad, and see how they do it. Just like a carpenter who works as an apprentice and studies the master, read." Solid writing isn't just for writing papers. We use writing for everything these days. We send emails, we fire off text messages, and this is an actual text message from my phone, and I had to share it. It says, "Good morning, Amy. Hope you're doing well. Designed by, do you guys know I will text you this afternoon when I am heading your way because I was sheriff. Should be after 4 when I will get there today, but I will text you and let you know no." So when I read this, I thought, well, he might be with the sheriff, and that's why he's coming after 4. He will text me and let me know. And now this is a simple case of firing off a text without proofing it. We all do this. But I will be honest, this guy sent texts like this to me numerous times. So what does it say about him? People with strong writing skills are perceived as more reliable and trustworthy. Honing in this skill set will not only help you in your current job, but will help you move up the corporate ladder. A study by Grammarly noted that those with fewer grammatical errors in their writing correlated to more promotions and higher salaries. So writing is pretty important. So we know writing takes us farther in our careers, because I just told you that. But solid writing also helps us get along with others better. When you consider that 66% of companies offer some form of remote work, and with a growing number going fully remote, a great deal of communication has shifted from face-to-face to online. We rely heavily on email, text, instant messenger platforms, and in a matter of seconds, your short email or IM exchange can either charm somebody or turn somebody off right away, and it can be very well by mistake. Writing in school is so much more prevalent than it used to be. With the online classroom, discussions that would often take place face-to-face are now taking place in forums, and our instructors are grading us on them. Almost every class has a writing component or a research paper, and years ago, this really wasn't the norm. But writing effectively will take you farther in school and in your career. So how can we become more confident in our writing? To become a better writer, first things first, expand your vocabulary. Spend time wordsmithing. Find words that better express what you're trying to convey, but be careful with the thesaurus. I've read many, many papers where I can tell my student went crazy with the thesaurus and the sentences no longer make sense. You have to know the part of speech for the word that you're looking to replace. Replace an adjective with an adjective or a verb with a verb. And one suggestion is just look through your paper and see if you continually use one word over and over again. We tend to do that. If so, replace it with something else to help the flow of your paper. So when I was writing my dissertation, I had to describe other people's research a lot. So I might say, so-and-so said this or so-and-so wrote that. Well, said and wrote are super boring words. So I made a list of better verbs to use when I was writing, and I printed it out, kept it next to my computer, and I would just look down at my list and plug in a better word. When it comes to increasing your writing brain and abilities, it's not always best to go with what's easy. If easy doesn't inspire you in some way, you're going to still struggle to write that paper. It's better to choose a topic that you care about. Choose topics that connect to your skills, your interests, your future, people you know, or just topics that challenge you in a good way. Research and writing can actually be enjoyable if you have a passion about what you're writing. So let's get into it. You get an assignment, you read through the prompt, and you're immediately overwhelmed. Well, now it's time to break it down. First thing you should do is read and break apart the assignment. Ask yourself these questions. What's the most important point here? What is the purpose of this assignment? Is my purpose to provide information without forming an argument, to construct an argument based on research, or to analyze a poem and discuss its imagery? And who's my audience? Is my instructor my only audience? Who else might read this? Will it be posted online? Or what are my readers' needs and expectations? Then go back and break apart each section of the prompt. So a lot of times instructors will say something like, write a paper and address the following things. And then they'll list them out in bullet points. It's important to make sure that they aren't asking for 2 things in each bullet. Sometimes in our haste to get started, we miss that they're asking us to do 6 things instead of the original 4 that we noticed. And so I've told this before in other webinars, I'm a color coder. So I would color code each thing I was being asked to do, and then I'd number them in a way that made the most sense to me. And then I would use those color codes as I wrote to ensure I didn't forget anything once I started. It's easy to do that. So remember to keep the assignment directions close so you don't forget. And consider what I would do is print them out and then use your highlighters and keep those directions next to you as you form your paper. Action words are very important in an assignment. It's a good idea to circle all the action words in the prompt so you get a clear understanding of what you're being asked to do. If you are asked to summarize something, that's very different than analyzing something. Summarizing is putting something into your own words. Analyzing is a little deeper than that. It's interpreting and examining evidence and requires a more in-depth explanation. So you want to make sure that you don't summarize something when you should have been analyzing it. And one very important distinction and a common mistake I see from my students is the compare and contrast essay, which is much different than just discussing 2 things. You have to actually indicate how 2 things are the same and how they are different, not just explain one thing and then explain the other. So take time to identify those action words and consider what you're being asked to do. And if you don't know what you're being asked to do, that's when you need to reach out and use your resources. Maybe you need to talk to a tutor. A tutor can help you decode directions and clarify the assignment. It's always best to clarify the assignment rather than spending hours spinning your wheels and feeling unconfident about what you're doing. Steps for better writing are these. First of all, don't rush. Writing is a process. It takes time, consideration, planning, and revising. This goes hand in hand with avoiding procrastination. You sell the process short if you don't give yourself time to go through the writing process because you've put it off until the last minute. And as I've said many times, True fact, procrastinators get lower grades than those who work ahead of time. Sometimes I would read a prompt, think through all the steps, make an outline, do all the research, and then not write anything at all during that session. Sometimes I found that if I researched and then went for a walk or just did something else, I could use that time to process and form an argument in my head. Revise. If you really crank out the text and experiment and just let things flow, you'll need to go back over it. Many writers hate revising because it seems like so much work when they've already done all the writing. But if you want to be a good writer, you have to learn to revise, because revision is where the good writing really happens. It separates the mediocre from the great. So go back over everything, looking not only for grammar and spelling mistakes, but for unnecessary words and awkward structures. Maybe this is where you look to see if you're using a certain word over and over again. Maybe you have confusing sentences. Aim for clarity and for strength. In your revision process, read it out loud. Hearing it and hearing where you pause, where you trip up, where you need to take a breath will help you edit more effectively. Start and end strong. The most important part of your writing is the beginning and the end. The beginning sets the roadmap for your paper and helps both you and your reader with what to expect. The end is the last thing your instructor reads before they give you a grade, so it's pretty important. Spell and grammar check. Don't forget to do this. Grammar check will often catch the words that are spelled correctly, but also incorrectly. So you know those words that have two spellings and they mean two different things, like cite and cite, one with a C, one with an S. Students make this kind of mistake a lot. The grammar check will sometimes, but not all the time, catch these mistakes when your spell checker doesn't catch them, because technically you spelled it correctly. And then check the rubric. Last and very important and often missed step of being a good academic writer is the rubric. The importance of the rubric. Well, instructors use it to grade your paper. If they're going to have this thing in front of them while giving you a grade, shouldn't it be closely reviewed by you? It lists everything that will be graded, and sometimes the directions miss things. Hidden curriculum could be in the rubric. It's a small thing that a lot of instructors actually overlook. In instructional design, we used to call this hidden curriculum. The assignment may tell you to use evidence, but then the rubric may tell you to use 5 or 6 pieces of evidence from at least 3 different sources. You can see how important that rubric is when it comes to this very important detail. If you had just read the directions, you may have included only 2 pieces of evidence and lost critical points. Once you've read the rubric and ensured that your paper is meeting the criteria, you can confidently submit that assignment knowing that you've done your best work. So a great way to look at a rubric is the way that this one is presented. They don't all look this way, but I kind of wish they did. See how the top row is laid out? There is a column for the A paper and the B paper, and so on. If you are interested in getting an F, well, then you could just look at the last column. But I know a lot of students who are going to give it at least half a shot. They're fine with the B or C. So does that mean they should look at the C paper column only, middle of the road, meet most of the requirements? No, you don't want to go that way, because you might think that you've met the requirements, but your instructor may think that you haven't. So now you're flirting with the D. Your best bet is to pretty much ignore the entire rubric except for the column for the A. That's what you're striving for. It doesn't mean you'll get it, but it does at least mean you're including all the necessary criteria and probably then some. In most rubrics, this will say something like excellent or excelling or exceeds expectations. This doesn't mean that you've written a really good paper. It means you've written better than the expectations. So how do you close read a rubric? My advice is to print it out and then print a copy of the assignment directions, like I already told you, and put them side by side. And note if anything in the rubric looks different than in the assignment directions. If you notice something more specific in the rubric, then highlight it or copy it over onto your directions. You want to look for any verbs or anything that's telling you specifically what to include in your assignment. So let me show you how I would read this rubric. I'm going to look at the A paper where I have it circled. The beginning part is talking about excels in responding, interesting, demonstrate sophistication of thought. Okay, you're going to do your best at that. Hard to know if the instructor will really think you did. Then it says central idea or thesis is clearly communicated, worth developing, limited enough to be manageable. Okay, now it's telling me that my thesis or my main idea, it needs to be good. So I would circle that. I would highlight or circle or underline idea and thesis. And I would go back after I finish my paper and look at that again and just make sure, is it real clear? And then towards the end of that little spot where I have it circled, it says, understands and critically evaluates its sources. I would highlight sources. Okay, it's telling me right there, this is not just my opinion. I have to have some kind of source. And appropriately limits and defines terms. That's important too. I would highlight defines terms. So when I finish my paper, I'm going to go back and I'm going to make sure my thesis looks good. I've used sources and I've defined the terms that I'm talking about. If there is anything here that I'm unsure about, I have a concern or a question, or I want to make sure I come back and check again, I underline it, highlight it, something. Maybe that's an area where I might need tutoring, or I might need to ask the instructor a question. Another thing to consider that is usually a big thing that I've noticed from my students is that each column here is a range. The A column is an A. It could be a 93%. It could be a 95%. It doesn't always mean 100%. More than once, I've had a student inquire, how did I get scored all along that first column and not get 100%? And I said this in the last webinar, I myself reserve 100% for perfection, and perfection is rarely achieved. So I used this slide in my first confidence webinar too, but I want to address it again. Get feedback as early as you can in a class and then apply it before you submit another paper so you don't make the same mistakes twice. Don't take instructor feedback personally. See it as a way to help you grow and become a better writer, a stronger student, a smarter student. Don't expect perfection. So many of us think that any feedback means we're not doing a good job. Feedback just means you have room to grow. And if you didn't have room to grow, you wouldn't be in school. So expect that you are doing the best you can. You're improving in every paper you write. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't mention plagiarism. You're never going to be a good writer if you don't write your own stuff. You're never going to have the satisfaction of learning or the gaining of confidence from submitting your own work if you submit someone else's. Plagiarism is the easy way out, and at least 40% of students admit to cheating on written assignments. And those are the ones who know they are doing it, deliberate plagiarizers. Deliberate plagiarizing is knowingly copying and pasting something from a source without citing it or buying a paper online. But there's another thing that's called accidental plagiarism. This is when you don't take good notes, you don't remember that you read something somewhere and you put it into your paper, and this comes from being disorganized in your research process. Don't let the fear of plagiarism paralyze you though. Just think of it this way. You're doing your best to be honest. If someone told you a really good story and you were really into it, it was so good you wanted to make sure you remembered it well so you could go tell someone else about it. So you'd listen intently. You'd commit that to your memory, and then you'd hold on to it as best you could so you could do it justice when you told someone else. And you'd tell them exactly where it came from. This isn't your story, this is somebody else's story, right? This is the same principle. You're taking in good information and you're respecting that information, and you want to make sure you give credit to the person who shared it with you. So let's talk a little bit more about academic integrity. When you sit down to research and write, you need to be very methodical about how you take notes. Document articles you read and gather ideas from them. You have to find your own system, but a well-defined system will help you with your confidence. There's no better feeling, well, in my opinion, and I'm a total nerd, but there's no better feeling then getting a topic for an assignment, having no clue what you want to write about, beginning the research process, and then very clearly having your paper come into focus, beginning to form a clear argument, reading articles that support your thoughts, and then click. I know what I'm going to write, and it's going to be great. Something I have often seen is a reference page with 6 articles listed, and only 3 of those are actually cited in the paper. I've also read entire dissertations where citations exist all throughout the document, but then there's no matching reference on the reference page. Take time to make sure all of this is checked and rechecked. So if you have a source on your reference page, you cite it in your document and vice versa. Everything should match. Now, research to me is a 5-step process. Most papers that you write in high school and college are research papers. They may not be labeled as such, but if you have to find any evidence for your paper, then that's considered research. So the first step is searching, Googling, going through the library, finding books or videos, and then note-taking, taking what you found in your research, assimilating it, and figuring out how to incorporate it into your topic and the argument of your paper. Then there's the outlining and writing phase. Writing is much more than a copy-paste endeavor. It takes critical thinking and deep concentration. As you write, you begin to back up your own thoughts with the thoughts and research of experts. This is where your citations come in. Now you're giving credit, citing and formulating your reference page. And lastly, revising. We talked about this already, and many writers skip this because they're tired. They run out of time. They're sick of thinking about this paper. Schedule time for revision, and your best revision session is one with a fresh brain. So write one day and revise the next. Where do you find credible sources for your research? Many libraries, schools, and universities have electronic databases, so look for a database link on your local library or school website. Check out ProQuest and ERIC for scholarly articles, and you can also look through the New York Times archives for historical sites. Use some primary sources, meaning use the original document and not someone else's summary of it. If you read someone's summary of something and you want to use it, go find that original source. It's better to quote the original author than someone else who was quoting or summarizing the original author. Think of it like a game of telephone. The more people who take what someone said, the better chance they have of interpreting it in their own way. Look at the domain suffix. This means if it's a .edu or a .gov, maybe a .org, in general, these are pretty reliable sources on the web. However, beware of political sites used to sway your opinion, and use these sites with caution, checking for credibility and authority. Company websites generally end in .com and professional organizations in .org. And just be aware that both of these website types could have an agenda and they could be promoting something specific. Over the years, Wikipedia has become more reliable as a general source of information. Some instructors will allow you to cite Wikipedia in your paper and others won't. However, Wikipedia is a great starting point. The references section of each Wikipedia entry is rich with source materials. Scroll all the way down to the bottom of an entry and you'll find a list of resources related to your topic. And usually those have links and you can just click and start there. This is true of any resource. If you find a good scholarly article, go to its references page and see if you can find additional articles for your topic. Use the titles, the journal titles, or the author to search for those in your online library or in Google Scholar. If you've never tried Google Scholar, it is a great database of research-based materials. Check the dates of your sources. If you're citing something that's more than 5 or 10 years old, it is no longer credible. More research has likely been done. The world has changed, issues have changed. The only time, of course, that this is not applicable is when you're citing a primary source or a historic event. Those don't change. And then you want to examine the author's credentials. If you're not sure whether or not the author is a credible source, look them up and see what they do. Go with your instincts. I did another webinar on critical thinking and research skills where I go into much more depth about how to research, how to take good notes when you're writing a paper, and you can go back and watch that recording if you want more information like this. The only way to get better at writing is to do it over and over. If you have an opportunity to practice writing in any context, you should take it. If you're in a meeting and someone needs someone to take notes for everyone else, volunteer. If you have questions about something and you're usually the person who picks up the phone, try writing out a succinct email instead. These kinds of activities are considered low stakes writing. You're not getting graded, you're just practicing the art of putting together your thoughts, editing, revising, proofing, and sharing. Practice and you will begin to feel more confident about that writing and you will see your own improvement. And as you are writing, ask for help from a tutor. We have tutoring for essay writing and our tutors can help you all throughout this process. When you're just clarifying what the assignment is asking, when you have a rough draft and you want someone to tell you if your ideas are on the right track, or when you're looking to polish up your assignment. Tutoring can also help you gain confidence, and so I hope you'll think about trying it. And then this is the last part I want to tell you about. This came from a Tutor.com student. Thank you so much for your review. I appreciate the time you took to read over my document. Your feedback really boosted my confidence in submitting my assignment. Now I'll just show you my references really quickly, and then we'll take some questions. I'll send it back to Lauren.
Thank you so much, Amy. As always, these are always really fun. I was an English major myself, so I have been through a lot of papers, and sometimes it's very intimidating when you get assigned your big research paper for the term, or anything. Even doing reports in my job, sometimes it's a project. You have to set up time. So thank you for all the tips and tricks and things to consider as we build confidence. So again, we're going to open up the floor here to some questions, but if anyone hasn't gotten your questions in, feel free to start populating those in the question box. I do want to also just call out that we host a lot of these free webinars for students around different topics. So a good tip here is to follow us on our various social media channels that you see up on the screen, because this is where we post a lot of those sessions, both the ones that are upcoming and live events, as well as on our YouTube channel, we post the recording of all the past events, including this session, should be up on our YouTube channel in the next day or two. In addition to those of you who attended, you'll get an email version as well. So please feel free to follow us to keep kind of current with the latest and greatest events that we are going to be hosting. Okay, so let me get the questions up and see what we have. Okay, so one question is it better for a paper to have a transition word at the beginning of each paragraph?
Oh, that's a good question. Very specific. I like it. I think that is a good rule of thumb. The reason why is it helps you transition from the paragraph before, but it doesn't always flow right. So you may find that that transition word fits better in the second sentence. Maybe the first sentence is more of your topic sentence, and then it's there. I wouldn't say that is something you absolutely have to do every paragraph. So you really need to try it and see if it flows. And read it out loud and see if it makes sense. I mean, of course, you don't want to put the word like, however, if it doesn't fit what you're saying. So possibly the best way to use those transition words is in a compare and contrast essay. That probably would fit, but I can't say for sure.
Okay. One question is coming in just now is just about, is this being recorded? Yes, all of these sessions are recorded. We are sharing them with anybody who attended the session, or if they registered for the session, you'll get an email in the next day or two with a copy. Additionally, the YouTube channel that you see up on the screen is where we host and record, rather where we post all of our previous events, including this one will be up there in the next day or two as well. Okay. How do you encourage a student who comes to tutoring with a rough draft to go back and do research? This can be discouraged, or this can discourage the writer, but is necessary.
How do you encourage a student who comes to tutoring to go back and do research? Well, I think what we want is we want all students to do their very best work. That's our goal, is to help students do their very best work. So if you're a tutor, maybe you are, and you're saying that you struggle with this, sending students back to the, kind of almost like maybe sending them back to the drawing board, and maybe that's difficult, I would give very, very specific places in the document where they may need more research, rather than just a blanket, hey, you don't really have enough evidence here. That can be overwhelming for a student and can be taken wrong. But if you were to tell a student something like, hey, right here, right in this spot, I think you need another piece of evidence, see if you can find something. And maybe even giving them a couple of search terms to look for, or maybe a certain journal that you know that might help support their ideas. Things like that would help them from feeling like you're just saying, go back and start over, go back to the drawing board. So just more specific examples, I think, is probably the best way to do it. And then remind them, I want this paper to be the very best. I want you to get the best grade you can on this paper. So if you want that, then you need a little bit more evidence right here or here. And this is how I would recommend doing that. Hopefully it's taken okay.
Many students struggle with understanding a thesis. What is your go-to definition of what your thesis statement is?
My go-to definition of a thesis statement is a roadmap for your paper. It's telling your reader exactly what your entire paper is going to be about. So there are some people who like that 3-point thesis statement. I personally don't love that because I think it's a little bit formulaic, and sometimes it's better not to write that way, but I can say that that's the easiest way to start. So if a thesis is like, I don't know what to say, I don't know what to say, look at your body paragraphs and plug in a little bit of each body paragraph into that thesis. And that kind of comes out in that 3-point thesis statement that you were often taught to do. But the main point is you just want to give like an overall viewpoint of what the paper is about. This is what I'm going to write about. Here's my argument. Here's what you're going to expect when you read this. That is a thesis statement.
Awesome. Okay, a couple Tutor.com specific ones it looks like. So one question is, what Tutor.com resources are available to grow these writing skills? So I think
Good one.
most of you have probably heard about this webinar through one of the partners that we work with. We work with a lot of different kinds of partners, from libraries to schools to colleges to employers who offer Tutor.com to you. Many times it is a free tutoring opportunity for you. So we'll just kind of lightly have Amy touch on what we make available for writers.
Yeah, we have a Tutor.com writing center, and it's open for students. So you're welcome to look there. And if you just Google Tutor.com writing center, you should be able to find it. I highly recommend that. We basically try to help students in every area that we see where students struggle. So we're constantly adding new resources to it, things from how to cite your sources, how to make a reference page, to all the different types of essays that you might have to write and how they should be structured, to simple things like how to add commas to your paper. Where do commas go? Things like that. So we have a lot of resources there. So I recommend our Writing Center. And then attached to the Writing Center, we also have an Academic Integrity Center, which goes a little bit more into the different types of plagiarism. I touched on a few of them today. You know, the deliberate plagiarizing is one thing, but there's a lot of people who just plagiarize by accident. So we talk a little bit about how to avoid that. And so there's resources there as well. So the Academic Integrity Center, you can get to it through our Writing Center.
So I just included the URL to the audience to the Writing Center if you want to bookmark that.
Thank you.
And then just to add to that, for those of you who do have free Tutor.com access, we offer different kinds of writing help from our tutors. So the primary way that a lot of students get that help is our live sessions, where they drop in 24/7 and talk to one of our essay writing tutors, and they work through that paper together in real time, having a discussion, marking the paper up. So you get some real-time coaching and questions answered as you want to go through it with somebody side by side. Additionally, we have for a lot of programs, not all programs, but a lot of our programs, we offer an asynchronous help, which means you get to drop your paper off and you'll get feedback from one of your writing tutors within 12 hours. So you'll get, you know, the essay back with some comments and some recommendations for resources and areas for improvement. You'll also get back a summary feedback form that gives you kind of the areas you need to look at. For example, your thesis statement maybe needs to be tightened up. That's the kind of feedback you'd get from a tutor in the drop-off service. So you have a couple different kinds of help depending on what's available through the Tutor.com partner that you connect to us with. Okay, let's see what else we have here. So what is the best way to use quotations?
Well, that's a good one. Don't. I'm just kidding. I don't recommend you use a lot of quotations. I think this is where a lot of students think if I'm required to cite a source or use some kind of evidence, I must quote it. And quotations oftentimes don't flow very well in your paper. It's really hard to get somebody else's words to sound, to flow well with your own words. So better than using quotations is to summarize, to paraphrase what you've read. That sounds a lot better in writing generally. So instead of just going right into a quote, just trying to plug in a quote somewhere in the middle of a paragraph, it's a lot easier to say, so-and-so suggested that, and you just keep writing that this, and this, and now you've said it in your own words, and now it flows better with your paper. So I definitely recommend that you try that. Then if you have to include a quote, it's required in some way that you must have exact quotes. And by the way, if you are quoting a statistic, it should be quoted. You don't want to take a statistic and try to put it into your own words. 10% of students do this and this and this. You want to go ahead and quote that. You just want to make sure you're flowing into and flowing out of your quote in a way that makes sense. You don't want to just throw it into a middle of a paragraph. I don't recommend starting a paragraph with a quote, and I really don't recommend ending a paragraph with a quote. I recommend trying to get it in the middle of the paragraph, which then requires that you have to make it flow. So just read it out loud and see, like, does it sound weird? Then it probably is. So then see what you can, how can you lead into it? That so-and-so from this place said this, and then you put the quotes. And maybe you don't even quote the entire sentence. That's another thing students do, is they try to quote entire sentences or an entire sentence when really they only needed a little part of it. So you could use an ellipses, ... and then put the part you want and then the quotes. So I hope that's somewhat helpful. There's a lot that goes into that, but that was a really good question.
Okay. Any last questions, please feel free to get them in. We're going to probably just take about one, maybe two more, depending on what we have here. I see one more that I think would be good. What is the best, I'm sorry, do you have any tips for writing an abstract?
Oh, abstracts are very hard. Certainly don't write the abstract until you're completely done with your paper. You've edited it. It's, literally one of the last steps you should do is the abstract. An abstract is definitely needs to tell the reader everything that you've concluded in your paper. So it's kind of weird because you feel like you shouldn't tell the reader everything that's in the article or the paper, because then they won't read it. And that is kind of how an abstract is. It's like you're giving them everything they need to know, and they actually wouldn't have to read your paper necessarily. So that's the best I can say, is what you've concluded, the argument you've made. If you've done any research yourself and you've come up with any results from your research, that is included in your abstract. So that's why you do it last. It also needs to be really short and to the point, never more than, well, 1 page would be a long abstract. So maybe half a page or so, depending on your font and if you're skipping, lines and stuff. But that's my best advice.
Awesome. Okay, we'll do the last question here and then we'll call it a day. I have a tendency to use a lot of citations in my papers. I want to use fewer. What is one way I can improve? I always had trouble with this too. I always wanted to have so many different things I was citing that sometimes it's like you got to remember you have to do some of the writing. So
Exactly. That's the thing, is that your instructor wants to hear your argument. They want to know that you've done research and you found something to support your argument, but it's about your argument, not what someone else has done. So what you really want to do is in general, now this is a big generalization, but in general, you don't want more than a couple of citations in a paragraph at the most. And this depends on how long your paragraph is, obviously. If you have a 5-sentence paragraph, then really you might only be citing one thing. The rest of it needs to be yours. You need to draw your own conclusions from what you've read, and that's what's important. So you're drawing your own conclusion, you're synthesizing what you've read, and that is what you, when you don't have to cite. So that's what you want to do. That's the critical thinking. All of us can find stuff and just plug it in, but when you're doing your own thinking is when you're showing that you're learning. So definitely try to do that. Try to read stuff and say, well, first of all, is this absolutely the most important thing I need to put in here? Is it really, really important that I cite this? Or is it better for me to draw my own conclusion here based on all the things that I've read? It's a good question.
okay. I don't see any other questions. So at this point, Amy, any last words for our confident writers out there?
No, but you can do it. Just practice. That's it.
If any of you are Ted Lasso fans, which is one of my favorite shows on television right now, just
Yes.
that sign he puts up on the wall that says believe. And if you haven't seen the show, it's very helpful. Brings a lot of joy, but a lot of motivation too. So believe in
Yes.
yourself.
It's a
Uh,
positive show.
yeah. So we thank you again for those of you who participated in many of our webinar series, or if you're just joining us for today, again, use these resources that we have here to see what else we'll be hosting in the future, and go back to our YouTube channel. We have so many good sessions that Amy and others on the team have hosted around different topics to help you feel more confident, to build strategy on studying, test taking, stress management, which I think a lot of us need right now. So feel free to take advantage of those recordings on our YouTube channel. Thank you again, everyone. We hope you have a good rest of the day and weekend. And thank you, Amy.
Thanks.